I have forgotten more history than your species has experienced. She turned to face him. Do you know what I see when I look at mortals like you? Jake shook his head, unable to speak. I see fire, she said softly. Bright and brilliant and desperate because it knows it will burn out. You mortals live with such intensity because you must. You do not have the luxury of eternity. She reached out and placed her hand against his chest, over his heart. Your heart beats so fast, like a hummingbird. I am nervous, Jake admitted. I have no idea why the queen of an empire is interested in talking to me. Because you understand something most mortals do not, she said. You understand the tragedy of existence, the beauty of impermanence. Most mortals rage against their limited time or hide from it. You accept it and find meaning in it. A disturbance at the garden entrance made them both turn. Eric was running toward them, his hand on his weapon. Your Majesty, get back, he shouted. Jake saw it then, a shimmer in the air near the queen, something that was not supposed to be there. His xenobiology training kicked in, recognizing the signature of a cloaking field. He did not think. He simply moved, throwing himself between the queen and the shimmer as it solidified into a figure in dark armor, a blade already descending. The blade caught him across the shoulder instead of finding the queen's heart. Pain exploded through Jake's body, but he managed to grab the assassin's arm, throwing off the second strike. Eric's weapon fired, and the assassin crumpled. Jake fell to his knees, blood soaking through his diplomatic jacket. The queen caught him before he hit the ground, her hands surprisingly strong. Foolish mortal, she whispered, but her voice held something warm. You threw yourself in front of a blade for someone you just met. Could not let you die. Jake managed through gritted teeth. Bad for diplomatic relations. She laughed again. That same genuine sound. Yes, very bad for relations. Medical personnel rushed in, both human and Viridian. As they worked on Jake's shoulder, the queen remained beside him, still holding his hand. I want him as my personal liaison, she announced to Ambassador Keleth, who had arrived in the chaos. He will remain in the palace as my direct contact with humanity. Your Majesty, Keleth began. He is wounded, and protocol suggests. I am aware of protocol. I wrote most of it. The Queen's voice carried absolute authority. When he is healed, Jake Morrison will attend me directly. This is not a request. As the medics lifted Jake onto a stretcher, the Queen leaned close, her breath warm against his ear. Her next words were so soft that only he could hear them. You belong with me, my mortal. Then the pain medication took hold, and Jake's world faded to black, those words echoing in his mind like a promise and a warning all at once. 3 months had passed since the assassination attempt, and Jake Morrison had learned that living in an alien palace was nothing like the adventure stories he had read as a child. It was stranger, more beautiful, and far more complicated than any fiction. He stood in the Queen's private study, a room filled with artifacts from civilizations that had turned to dust before humanity discovered fire. Queen Laraestra sat across from him, reviewing reports on a holographic display that floated in the air between them. They did this every morning now, discussing matters of state, human concerns, and the 1,000 small details that connected their two species. Your sister has published another article, the Queen said without looking up. She questions my motives for keeping you here. Jake winced. Lisa Grant had always been protective, but her journalistic instincts made her suspicious of everything. Her latest piece in the Earth Times suggested that the Viridians were holding Jake as a hostage, or worse, that he had been brainwashed. Lisa means well, Jake said. She just worries. She is right to worry. The Queen finally looked at him, and Jake still felt that same jolt he had experienced on the first day. Tell me, Jake Morrison, are you happy here? Yes, he answered honestly. Happier than I have ever been. Even though you know this cannot last? There it was, the truth that hung between them always. Jake was 32. If he lived a long life by human standards, he might reach 90 or 100. To the Queen, that was nothing. A blink? Because it cannot last, Jake said quietly. That is what makes it matter. The Queen smiled, sad and beautiful. You say such things, and I remember what it was like to be young. Before the treatments, before we learned to live forever. We felt everything so deeply then. A chime sounded, and Ambassador Khalith appeared in the doorway. Your Majesty, Prince Atheris requests an audience. He says it is urgent. The Queen's expression hardened slightly. Very well. Send him in. Prince Atheris entered like a storm-given form. He was tall even for a Viridian, with skin the color of deep ocean water and eyes that glittered with intelligence and ambition. He had been the Queen's chief advisor for over 2,000 years, and he made no secret of his disapproval of Jake's presence. My Queen, Atheris said, bowing with perfect form that somehow conveyed contempt. I must speak with you about the mortal. Jake has a name, the Queen said coolly, and he stands right there. You may address your concerns to both of us. Atheris turned his gaze on Jake, and it felt like being studied by a scientist examining a particularly dull specimen. Very well. I have been reviewing the security protocols. The human has access to sensitive areas of the palace. He attends private council meetings. He knows details of our defensive systems and political structure. All this, and he will return to Earth eventually, carrying our secrets with him. Jake is not a spy, the Queen said. He does not need to be intentionally working against us to be a security risk. Mortals gossip, they write memoirs, they cannot help themselves. Their brief lives make them desperate to leave marks, to be remembered. How long before he shares what he knows, either for profit or simply for the satisfaction of being important? Jake felt anger rising in his chest. I would never. You say that now, Atheris interrupted, but you will be dead in 50 years, perhaps less. What will you promise then, when you are old and forgotten and desperate to matter, when you have children or grandchildren who need money or advantages? Enough, the Queen said, and her voice carried the weight of millennia. Jake has proven his loyalty. He took a blade meant for me. A fortunate accident that earned him your favor, Atheris countered. Surely you see the pattern, my Queen. He is not the first mortal you have grown fond of. There was Keeper Ton of the Bravax 3,000 years ago. You favored him for 20 of their short years, and when he died, you mourned for 2 centuries. Then there was the Silith poet. What was her name? She lived for barely 30 cycles, and you were inconsolable for a generation after her passing. The Queen stood abruptly. You overstep, Atheris. I speak truth that no one else dares to voice. You are the eternal Queen. But you seek out these brief flames, these mortals who burn bright and fast, and every time they die, you diminish. The Empire needs you strong, not weakened by grief over creatures whose lives are meaningless in the scale of history. Jake found his voice, though it shook with rage. Our lives are not meaningless. Atheris finally looked at him directly. You are insects who think themselves eagles because you can hop from one branch to another. Your entire species will be extinct before the Queen is even middle-aged by our standards. How can that be anything but meaningless? That is precisely what makes it meaningful, Jake shot back. We know we are temporary, so every choice matters. Every day counts. You have forever, so nothing has weight for you anymore. When was the last time you felt real joy, Prince Atheris? Real fear? Real anything? Something flickered in the prince's eyes, quickly suppressed. I feel concern for my queen and my empire. That is sufficient. Sufficient? Jake repeated. What a sad word for a life. The queen moved between them. Atheris, your concerns are noted, but Jake remains as my liaison. That is final. The prince bowed again, that same gesture of perfect disrespect. As you command, my queen. But when this mortal breaks your heart, as all mortals do, remember that I warned you. He left without waiting to be dismissed. The silence after his departure felt heavy. The queen returned to her seat, suddenly looking tired in a way that made Jake's heart ache. He is not wrong, she said quietly, about the pattern. About what will happen. Jake sat beside her. Tell me about them. The other mortals you knew. The queen was quiet for so long that Jake thought she might not answer. Then she began to speak, her voice distant with memory. Keeper Ton was a scholar. His people lived for only 40 standard years, but he had a mind that could grasp concepts that took my own people centuries to understand. He used to make me laugh with his observations about immortal society. He said we were like trees that had forgotten we once grew from seeds. She smiled faintly. When he died, I had him buried in the memorial gardens. I visited his grave every day for 200 years. And the poet? Lyris? Her name was Lyris. She saw beauty in entropy, in the way things fell apart. Her poems were about death and endings, and they were the most alive things I had ever encountered. She taught me that there is artistry in impermanence. The Queen's voice grew softer. She died in my arms, whispering her final poem. I have never forgotten a single word. Jake took her hand, feeling how cool her skin was compared to his. Why do you do it? If it hurts so much when they die, why let yourself care about mortals at all? The Queen looked at him, and her ancient eyes held something raw and honest. Because the alternative is worse. Do you know what happens to immortals who avoid all attachment, who insulate themselves from loss? They become like a Theris. Cold. Empty. Going through the motions of existence without ever truly living. She squeezed his hand. You mortals burn so brightly because your time is limited. You make me feel that heat. For the years you are here, I am alive again, not just existing. But I will die, Jake said. Probably in 50 or 60 years if I am lucky. I know. And it will destroy you for centuries afterward. I know that too. Then why? Because you are worth it, she said simply. Because these years with you, however few they are, will matter more than 1,000 years of comfortable numbness. Because when I am 8,000 years old, most days blur together into meaningless sameness. But today, right now, this moment with you, I will remember this clearly 10,000 years from now. Jake felt tears on his face and did not bother to hide them. I wish I could stay with you forever. If you could, you would not be the person I love, the Queen said gently. Your mortality is not a flaw, Jake Morrison. It is what makes you precious. Do you understand? He did, intellectually. But emotionally, it felt like a cruel joke. To find someone who understood him completely, who valued him not despite his humanity, but because of it, and to know that time itself was their enemy. What do we do? He asked. The Queen stood and pulled him to his feet. We do what all mortals must do. We live. We make the most of the time we have. We create memories that will last long after you are gone. She led him toward the balcony that overlooked the city. Come. I want to show you something I have never shown any mortal before. They stood together in the fading light of Azurith Prime's 3 suns, and the Queen pointed toward a section of the palace gardens below. Do you see that garden there, separate from the others? Jake nodded. That is the memorial gardens. Every mortal I have ever truly cared for is honored there. Ton has a statue where he sits reading, forever frozen in his favorite pose. Lyris has a fountain that recites her poems in water and light. There are 47 others spanning 8,000 years. She turned to face him. One day, you will be there too, Jake Morrison. And I will visit you, and remember, and be grateful that I knew you. It should have been morbid, discussing his own memorial. Instead, Jake felt strangely comforted. He would die, yes, but he would not be forgotten. Not by her. What will my memorial be? He asked. The Queen smiled. I do not know yet. We have time to decide. Not much time, by my standards, but enough. We have enough. She embraced him then, and Jake held her close, feeling the impossible paradox of her existence. Ancient beyond measure, yet in this moment she felt as vulnerable as he did. You belong with me, my mortal, she whispered, echoing the words from that first day. For as long as time allows. And Jake, knowing the heartbreak that waited at the end of this road, knowing the pain they would both endure, whispered back, for as long as time allows. 6 months had transformed Jake's life in ways he never could have imagined. He woke each morning in quarters adjacent to the Queen's private chambers, shared breakfast with a being who had lived longer than human civilization, and spent his days learning secrets of the universe that most humans would never know. but the weight of their impossible situation grew heavier with each passing day. Danny Cooper arrived on a Tuesday, and Jake barely recognized his best friend from Earth. They had grown up together in the same neighborhood, joined the diplomatic corps at the same time, dreamed the same dreams of exploring the stars. Now Danny stood in the palace reception hall, looking completely out of place, his Earth-style suit wrinkled from the long journey. "Jake," Danny said, gripping him in a tight hug. "Man, you look different." "Different how?" Jake asked, leading him through corridors that Danny stared at with wide eyes. "I do not know. Older, maybe. Or sadder. Both." Danny stopped walking and grabbed Jake's arm. "Are you okay? Really okay? Because Lisa has been losing her mind back home, and your messages have been getting shorter and shorter." Jake wanted to explain, but how could he put it into words? How could he tell Danny that he was in love with someone who would outlive him by thousands of years? That every moment of happiness was shadowed by the knowledge of its inevitable end. "I am fine," Jake said. "Just busy. Come on, I want to show you the observation deck." They spent the afternoon catching up, and Danny filled him in on news from Earth. The human government was debating whether to push for more access to Viridian technology. Several corporations were lobbying to establish trade agreements. Colonel Amy Rodriguez, a hardline military officer, was giving speeches about how humans should not become dependent on alien powers. "She thinks you have been compromised," Danny said carefully. "She is pushing for your recall to Earth. On what grounds? On the grounds that you spend all your time with an alien queen who could be manipulating you." Danny's expression was uncomfortable. "Jake, is she? Manipulating you, I mean?" "No," Jake said firmly. "She is honest about everything. Maybe too honest." "Then what is going on? Because from the outside, it looks like you have gone native. You barely file reports anymore. You ignore messages from Earth. You are living in the palace like some kind of royal consort." Jake felt anger flash through him. "Did he? Is that what people are saying?" "Some people. Others think you are doing important work. But Jake, you have to understand how this looks. A young human diplomat, alone on an alien world, spending all his time with their immortal queen. It looks like either she is using you, or you are using her, or both." Before Jake could respond, a palace attendant approached. "The queen requests your presence in the archive hall. She says you may bring your guest if you wish." Danny's eyes went wide when they entered the archive hall. It was a space that seemed to stretch into infinity, filled with crystalline structures that held the memories and knowledge of thousands of civilizations. At the center stood an elderly Viridian with skin so pale it was almost translucent. "Keeper Vol," the queen said warmly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." The old archivist bowed slowly. "It is always my honor, Your Majesty. Though I confess I am curious why you wish to discuss the restricted histories." "Because Jake deserves to know the truth," the queen said, "about what happened to the others." Keeper Vol studied Jake with eyes that held even more depth than the queen's. "You are the newest one, yes? The newest mortal to capture her heart?" He sighed. "Very well, come with me." They followed him deep into the archives, to a section that felt older than the rest. Vol activated a crystal, and images began to play in the air around them. Jake saw the queen, looking exactly as she did now, sitting beside a bed where a frail alien lay dying. "Keeper Ton," Vol narrated, "a Brevac scholar who lived only 40 years. The queen loved him for 20 of those years. Watch what happens when he dies." In the image, the alien took his last breath. The queen sat perfectly still for a moment, then began to scream. It was a sound of pure anguish that made Jake's blood run cold. She screamed until her voice gave out, then sat in silence for what the timestamp indicated was 6 days. She did not eat, did not sleep, did not speak for 3 months, Vol said quietly. The empire nearly fell apart. Prince Ataris had to assume temporary control. When she finally emerged, she was changed. Harder, colder. It took her 2 centuries to laugh again. The image shifted, showing the queen with a different mortal, a delicate creature with wings like stained glass. "Lyris the poet," Vol continued. "The queen swore she would not make the same mistake, that she would keep distance. But mortals have a way of breaking through our defenses. Watch. This time, when the poet died, the queen did not scream. She simply held the body and whispered poems until the sun rose. But over the following weeks, the images showed her withdrawing from the world, neglecting her duties, wandering the memorial gardens like a ghost. 400 years of mourning that time, Vol said. The pattern repeats. She loves mortals because they remind her of life before immortality. But each time they die, she pays a terrible price. Danny looked at Jake with horror. You are going to do this to her? You are going to let yourself become another name in her list of dead loves? It is not that simple, Jake started, but Vol interrupted. Yes, it is exactly that simple. You mortals are all the same, thinking your love is special, that you will be different. But you all die, and she always suffers. The old keeper fixed Jake with a hard stare. The kind thing, the merciful thing, would be to leave now. Go back to Earth. Let her forget you. I do not want to be forgotten, Jake said quietly. Of course you do not. Mortals never do. That is your curse, your desperate need to matter, to leave a mark. But think about her for once. Think about what your death will cost her. The queen had been silent throughout this, but now she spoke. Vol, show him the rest. Show him the alternative. The archivist hesitated, then activated another crystal. This image showed the queen from 1,000 years ago attending a council meeting. She sat on her throne with perfect posture, spoke with perfect diction, made perfect decisions, and she looked completely dead inside. This was during a period when the queen avoided all mortals, Vol explained. She was efficient, effective, and utterly empty. She ruled for 800 years like this, never laughing, never crying, never feeling anything at all. He paused. The empire was stable, but it had no soul. She had no soul. Which is worse? The queen asked softly. To feel deeply and suffer when that feeling ends, or to feel nothing at all? Vol closed the images. I am an archivist, Your Majesty, not a philosopher. I merely keep records. But if you want my opinion after 10,000 years of watching civilizations rise and fall, I will tell you this. The mortals are right about one thing. It is better to burn brightly for a short time than to smolder dimly forever. Danny grabbed Jake's arm. Can we talk? Alone? They left the archives and found an empty garden. Danny paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair. This is insane, Jake. You know that, right? You are going to die. She is going to fall apart. And you are acting like it is all fine. It is not fine, Jake said, but it is real. For the first time in my life, I am part of something that matters, not because I will live forever, but because I will not. That makes no sense. It makes perfect sense. She has forever. I have maybe 50 years if I am lucky. So every day we spend together has weight. Every conversation, every moment, it counts in a way that things do not count for immortals. Jake looked up at the alien sky. Danny, when you are immortal, you can always do things tomorrow, or next year, or next century, but I am running out of time, and that makes the time I have precious. The queen offered you immortality, did she not? Danny asked suddenly. That is what this is really about. She wants you to stay with her forever. Jake nodded slowly. She offered. There is a treatment, a combination of genetic engineering, and something they call quantum consciousness transfer. It would give me thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands. And you said no? Are you crazy? I said no because it would not really be me anymore. Vol explained it to me. The treatment does not just extend life, it fundamentally changes who you are. Your emotions dull, your memories of being mortal fade. You start to think in terms of centuries instead of years. You stop being human in any meaningful sense. But you would be alive. You could be with her. But she would not be with me. She loves me because I am mortal, because I feel things deeply, because my time is limited. If I became immortal, I would become just another Viridian, just another eternal being going through the motions. Jake met Danny's eyes. She has had 10,000 years of that. What she needs is not another immortal companion. What she needs is someone to remind her what it means to be alive. Danny sat down heavily on a bench. So you're going to stay here, love her for a few decades, then die and let her suffer for centuries? Yes. That is the most selfish thing I have ever heard. Maybe, Jake admitted. Or maybe it is the opposite. Maybe giving her these years, even knowing how they end, is the kindest thing I can do. Because the alternative is her spending eternity alone, never risking connection, never feeling anything real. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Danny spoke again. What about you, Jake? What about your life? You could go back to Earth, find a human partner, have kids, grow old surrounded by family. Instead, you are choosing to spend your life with someone you can never truly have a future with. Jake smiled sadly. I would rather have 50 years of something real than 100 years of something comfortable but meaningless. She makes me feel alive, Danny. Every day with her is more vivid than anything I experienced in my entire life before coming here. You really love her. I really do. Danny stood up and pulled Jake into another hug. Then I guess I came here to tell you that you are crazy, but instead, I am going to tell you to be happy. Life is short, right? Might as well spend it loving who you want to love. They walked back toward the palace together, and Jake felt lighter than he had in weeks. He knew the future held heartbreak. He knew the queen would suffer when he died. He knew every rational argument said this was a terrible idea. But he also knew, with absolute certainty, that these years with her would be worth whatever pain came after. 2 years had passed since that conversation with Danny, and Jake had settled into a rhythm of life that felt both surreal and perfectly natural. He was 34 now, still young by human standards, but he had begun to notice the first small signs of aging. A few gray hairs at his temples, lines around his eyes when he smiled. The transport shuttle descended through layers of shimmering atmosphere, and Jake Morrison pressed his face against the viewport, like a child on his first trip to the ocean. Below him stretched the Viridian capital world of Azureth Prime, a planet that made Earth look like a rough draft of civilization. Towers of crystalline material spiraled toward the sky, connected by bridges that seemed to float on nothing but air. Gardens larger than entire Earth cities bloomed in colors Jake had no names for. Stop gawking, Morrison, Dr. Helen Carter said from the seat beside him. She was reviewing diplomatic protocols on her tablet, her gray hair pulled back in the same tight bun she had worn for the 20 years Jake had known her. We represent humanity here. Try to look like you have seen advanced technology before. I have seen advanced technology, Jake replied, still looking out the window. Just nothing like this. Commander Eric Stone, sitting across from them in full dress uniform, grunted his agreement. Intelligence reports said the Viridians were advanced. They did not say they were this advanced. How long have they had spaceflight, Dr. Carter? Over 15,000 years, Helen said without looking up. They achieved faster than light travel before humans invented the wheel. Jake finally pulled himself away from the window. At 32, he was the youngest member of the diplomatic team, a xenobiologist who had studied every scrap of information about the Viridians that humanity had managed to collect. It was not much. The Viridian Empire spanned thousands of worlds, but they rarely paid attention to younger species. Humanity had been trying to establish formal contact for 5 years before the Viridians finally agreed to this embassy exchange. The shuttle touched down on a landing platform that overlooked the city. We have reports from multiple sources suggesting that your relationship with Queen Lyriestra has crossed professional boundaries. Is that true? Jake felt his face flush. My relationship with the Queen is complicated, but it has not interfered with my duties to Earth. Answer the question, Rodriguez demanded. Are you romantically involved with an alien head of state? Before Jake could respond, the door opened and the Queen entered, her presence filling the room like a sudden storm. He is not required to answer your interrogation, she said coldly. Jake Morrison is under my protection as a diplomatic guest of the Viridian Empire. Senator Brooks stood quickly. Your Majesty, we meant no disrespect, but as a human citizen, Mr. Morrison has obligations to his home world. Of course he does, the Queen agreed, just as I have obligations to my empire, which is why we should discuss this matter openly rather than attempting to intimidate him in private. They reconvened in a larger conference room, with Archon Zephyr joining to represent the Viridian Council. The Archon was an ancient Viridian with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that missed nothing. "The situation is quite simple," Archon Zephyr began. "The Queen has become attached to a mortal. This attachment clouds her judgment and weakens her authority. The Council believes it would be best for all parties if the human returned to his home world." "You speak for the Council now?" the Queen asked dangerously. "I speak the truth that everyone sees but you refuse to acknowledge. This is not the first time, Your Majesty. We have watched this pattern repeat for millennia. You find a mortal, you become obsessed with them, you neglect your duties, and when they inevitably die, you fall apart. The Empire cannot afford another century of your mourning." Senator Brooks seized the opportunity. "It seems both our governments agree. Perhaps it is time for Mr. Morrison to return to Earth." Jake looked at the Queen, saw the conflict in her ancient eyes. She could order him to stay, could use her authority to keep him on Azureth Prime, but doing so would damage relations with Earth and give her political enemies more ammunition. "There is another matter to discuss," Colonel Rodriguez said, and her tone made Jake's stomach drop. "We have detected unusual military activity in the border regions. Multiple species are moving fleets into defensive positions. Our intelligence suggests something big is coming." The Queen's demeanor shifted instantly from personal to professional. "Show me." Rodriguez projected holographic maps showing ship movements across multiple sectors. Jake recognized the patterns immediately from his xenobiology training. Species that normally competed with each other were suddenly coordinating, all moving away from a specific region of space. "The Kryn Collective," the Queen said quietly. "They have begun their expansion." "Who are the Kryn?" Senator Brooks asked. Archon Zephyr answered. "A hive mind species that views all individualistic societies as threats to universal order. They have been dormant for 3,000 years, consolidating their strength. If they are moving now, it means they believe they can win." "Win what?" Rodriguez demanded. "Everything," the Queen said. "The Kryn do not negotiate. They do not coexist. They conquer and assimilate. If they are expanding again, every independent species in this region of the galaxy is at risk, including humanity." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Then Jake spoke up. "We need an alliance. Human tactical flexibility combined with Viridian technology and resources. Neither of us can face the Kryn alone." "The human has a point," Archon Zephyr admitted grudgingly. "But such an alliance would require unprecedented cooperation. We would need someone who understands both cultures, who has the trust of both governments." "No," the Queen said immediately. "Absolutely not. If there is a war coming, I want Jake as far from danger as possible." "Your Majesty," Jake said gently. "This is bigger than us, bigger than our relationship or our feelings. If the Kryn are really expanding, every mortal species in the galaxy is at risk."
"I have to help."
Senator Brooks studied him carefully. "Are you volunteering to serve as Joint Human Viridian Military Liaison?" "I am." "You are not a soldier," Rodriguez pointed out. "No, but I understand how both our species think. I can help coordinate strategies, translate intentions, bridge the gaps that could lead to miscommunication in the middle of a crisis." The Queen stood abruptly and left the room. Jake excused himself and followed her, finding her on a balcony overlooking the city. "You are choosing war over me," she said, her back to him. "I am choosing to protect both our peoples, which includes you. You could die, Jake. In battle, you could die long before your natural time." "I could," he admitted, "but I could also die walking back to my quarters." "Mortals do not get guarantees." She turned to face him, and he saw tears on her face. In 2 years together, he had never seen her cry. "I have lived for 8,000 years," she said. "I have lost so many mortals I cared about, but always, I knew their time would come naturally. The thought of you dying in battle, of having your life cut even shorter than it already is, I cannot bear it." Jake took her hands. "Then come with me. Help me. Use your experience, your knowledge, your power. We can do this together. You are asking me to risk you. I am asking you to fight for our future, however long or short that future might be." Admiral Charles Bennett arrived 3 days later with a fleet of human ships. He was a gruff career officer who made no secret of his skepticism about aliens, but he was also pragmatic enough to recognize a genuine threat when he saw one. The War Council met in the palace's strategic chamber, a room that could project holographic battle scenarios in 3 dimensions. Human officers sat alongside Viridian commanders, an unprecedented mixing of species. The Kryn advance in waves, the Queen explained, manipulating the hologram to show their tactics. They sacrifice their outer forces to probe defenses, learn patterns, then send in their main fleet with perfect coordination. How do we fight a hive mind? Bennett asked. Jake had been studying Kryn psychology for weeks. We use unpredictability. The Kryn strength is perfect coordination based on shared consciousness. Their weakness is they cannot truly understand individual decision-making. They can predict logical responses, but not creative or emotional ones. So we act crazy? One of the human officers asked skeptically. We act human, Jake corrected. We take risks that no rational hive mind would take. We make decisions based on intuition and courage rather than pure logic. We do things that should not work but do anyway because we believe in them. A Viridian commander spoke up. This is madness. Exactly, Jake said. That is the point. The Kryn have fought logical species for thousands of years. They have never fought humans before. We are unpredictable, emotional, and we do not accept that some things are impossible. That is our advantage. The Queen studied the hologram. There is a colony world, Theta 7, in the path of the Kryn advance. Mixed population, human and Viridian settlers. 40,000 people. The logical move would be to evacuate and cede the territory. But we are not going to do that, Bennett said, seeing where this was going. We are going to defend it. A defense would cost ships and resources we can barely afford, Archon Zephyr protested. But it would also tell the Kryn that we are willing to fight for every inch of territory, Jake argued. That we do not think like they do. And it would prove to both our peoples that this alliance is real, that we protect each other's citizens. The Queen looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. We defend. Theta 7. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. Jake worked 18-hour days, coordinating between human and Viridian forces, translating not just language, but entire ways of thinking about warfare. He barely saw the Queen except in official meetings, and the distance hurt more than he expected. Then came the night before the fleet departed for Theta 7. The Queen appeared at his quarters after midnight. I am going with the fleet, she said without preamble. What? No, you cannot. You are the Queen. You need to stay here where it is safe. And you are the man I love, and I will not let you fly into danger alone. She stepped closer. For 8,000 years I have sent others to fight while I remain safe in my palace, but you have shown me that some things are worth risking everything for. If you are willing to shorten your already brief life for this cause, then I can be brave enough to stand beside you. Jake pulled her into his arms. We might die, I know. This is crazy. I know that too. She smiled. I believe you called it acting human. The fleet departed the next morning, a combined force of human destroyers and Viridian cruisers moving in formation that would have been impossible just months before. At the center of the fleet, in a command ship that housed both species, Jake Morrison and Queen Myraestra stood side by side, preparing to face an enemy that had conquered galaxies. And for the first time in 8,000 years, the Queen felt something she had almost forgotten. She felt alive. The defense of Theta 7 lasted 6 brutal days. The Kryn came in waves exactly as the Queen had predicted, throwing expendable forces against their defenses to probe for weaknesses. Jake coordinated the response, mixing human guerrilla tactics with Viridian precision firepower in ways that confused the hive mind. They won, but barely, and at a cost of 32 ships and over 3,000 lives. In the aftermath, as both species mourned their dead together, something changed. Humans and Viridians who had viewed each other as strange aliens began to see each other as comrades. The alliance stopped being a political arrangement and became something real. But the Kryn were far from defeated. Intelligence reports showed massive fleet movements deeper in their territory. They were preparing something big. Jake stood in the war room 6 months after Theta 7, studying holographic projections with exhaustion pulling at his bones. He was 35 now, and the stress of coordinating an interstellar war was aging him faster than normal. More gray hair, deeper lines around his eyes, a weariness that never quite went away. Admiral Bennett pointed to a cluster of stars at the center of the display. Our scouts have identified this location as the Kryn Central Nexus. It is where their hive mind originates, where all their consciousness connects. If we could destroy it, we could potentially collapse their entire network. It is suicide, Archon Zephyr said flatly. The Nexus is protected by 6 layers of defense platforms, thousands of ships, and weapons we barely understand. Nothing would survive the approach. A frontal assault would not survive. The Queen corrected. But what about an unconventional approach? Something the Kryn would not anticipate? Jake studied the hologram, his mind racing. What if we did not try to fight our way in? What if we used a small ship, fast and heavily shielded, to slip through their defenses while the main fleet creates a distraction? One small ship against the entire Kryn defense network. Bennett shook his head. Who would be crazy enough to pilot that mission? I would, Jake said quietly. The room erupted in protests. The Queen slammed her hand on the table, silencing everyone. No, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Anyone but him. I will pilot it myself if necessary, but not Jake. You are the Queen, Jake said gently. The Empire needs you, but I am just one human diplomat. I am expendable. You are not expendable to me. They stared at each other across the table. 8,000 years of experience meeting 35 years of determination. Finally, Jake spoke. If we do not stop the Kryn, they will destroy everything. Every human world, every Viridian colony, every species that values individual life. My life, our relationship, none of it matters if the Kryn win. You know that. The Queen closed her eyes. I know, but knowing does not make it easier. Vice Admiral Nicole Harris, who commanded Earth's Deep Space Fleet, cleared her throat. If we are going to do this, we need the best pilot in either fleet. That is not Morrison. But if he is going as the coordinator, he will need someone who can fly anything. I will go, the Queen said. I have piloted ships for 8,000 years. There is no one better. Archon Zephyr stood abruptly. Your Majesty, the Council will never approve this. You cannot risk yourself on a suicide mission for a mortal. The Council does not command me, the Queen said coldly. I am still the sovereign of this empire, and I will do what I believe is right. We need to end this war before it consumes both our peoples. If that requires me to pilot a ship into the heart of enemy territory, then that is what I will do. The planning took 2 weeks. They would use a modified Viridian scout ship, small and fast with experimental shielding that might possibly get them through the Kryn defenses. The main fleet would launch a massive assault on a secondary target, drawing away as many Kryn ships as possible. Jake and the Queen would slip through during the chaos and deliver a quantum weapon directly into the Nexus core. The night before the mission, Jake found the Queen in the Memorial Gardens. She stood before an empty pedestal, the spot clearly prepared for someone not yet added to the collection of monuments. Is that for me? He asked. Yes, I had it prepared months ago. She did not look at him. I thought I had accepted it, the knowledge that you would die someday. But now that it might happen tomorrow, I find I am not as brave as I believed. Jake stood beside her. We might survive. We might. But the odds are not good. She finally turned to face him. I need to tell you something. I have never said it properly, never put it into words clearly enough. You do not have to. I love you, Jake Morrison. I have loved mortals before, but never like this, never with this depth of feeling. You have made 8,000 years of existence worth living. You have reminded me what it means to be alive rather than simply existing. And tomorrow, I might lose you, and the thought of it makes me want to scream the way I did when Tan died. Jake took her hands. I love you too, and I am terrified. But I am also grateful. I have lived 35 years, and most of them were ordinary. But these last years with you, I will die knowing I experienced something extraordinary. How many people can say that? They held each other in the garden as alien stars wheeled overhead, two beings separated by thousands of years but connected by something that transcended time. The mission launched at dawn. The scout ship was cramped, designed for speed rather than comfort. The Queen sat at the controls with the calm of someone who had flown through countless battles. Jake monitored the sensors and coordinated with the main fleet. As they approached the Kryn Nexus, the quantum weapon humming in the cargo bay, Jake watched the Queen's hands move across the controls with impossible precision. She flew the way she did everything, with the confidence of 8,000 years of experience. They are pursuing, Jake reported as Kryn interceptors peeled off from the defense platforms. 5 ships closing fast. The Queen sent their ship into a dive that would have killed a human pilot with the G-forces. She wove through debris fields and energy barriers with millimeters to spare, her reactions faster than any human could achieve. Main fleet is engaging the secondary target, Bennett's voice crackled over the comm. You have approximately 10 minutes before the Kryn realize it is a feint. That is all we need, the Queen said. They burst through the final defense layer, and there it was, the Nexus Core, a massive structure that pulsed with the combined consciousness of trillions of Kryn brick. It was beautiful, in a terrible way, like looking at the brain of an angry god. Launching weapon, Jake said, his hands steady despite his racing heart. The quantum weapon detached from their ship and accelerated toward the core. They had 5 minutes before it detonated. 5 minutes to get clear of the blast radius. But the Kryn had realized the danger. Every remaining ship converged on their position. Energy bolts filled the space around them, and the scout ship shuddered under the impacts. Shields at 30%, Jake reported. I see it, the Queen said, pushing the engines beyond their rated capacity. They shot forward, but more Kryn ships appeared ahead, forming a blockade. We are not going to make it out, Jake said, surprised by how calm he felt. The Queen looked at him, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. I am sorry, my mortal. I promised you decades, and I am giving you only years. You gave me everything that mattered, Jake said. He reached over and took her hand. No regrets. She smiled, tears streaming down her face, and turned back to the controls. No regrets. The weapon detonated. The Nexus core exploded in a cascade of energy that lit up space like a newborn star. The shockwave caught their ship, tearing through the weakened shields. Jake felt the ship coming apart around them, felt the terrible heat and pressure. Then, nothing. Jake woke up in a medical bay, his body wrapped in healing fields. Every part of him hurt, but he was alive. Dr. Kevin Walsh, a human scientist who had been studying Viridian medical technology, stood over him. Easy, easy, Walsh said. You have been unconscious for 3 days. You are lucky to be alive. The Queen? Jake asked, trying to sit up. She is fine. Viridians are tough. She has barely left your side since they pulled you both from the wreckage. Walsh smiled. The mission was a success, by the way. The Kryn network collapsed. The war is effectively over. The Queen entered the room at that moment, and Jake had never seen her look so disheveled. Her hair was loose, her robes rumpled, her eyes red from crying. You are awake, she said, and her voice cracked. We survived, Jake said wonderingly. We did. She sat on the edge of his bed, taking his hand carefully. Against all odds, against all logic, we survived. Over the following weeks, as Jake recovered, the full scope of their victory became clear. The Kryn Collective had fragmented without their central nexus. Individual groups were suing for peace, learning for the first time what it meant to think as individuals rather than as a hive. The war had cost both human and Viridian lives, but it had also forged an alliance that would last for generations. Ambassador Ryan Foster arrived to replace Jake as the official human liaison. He was a career diplomat, older and more experienced, perfect for managing the day-to-day details of the alliance. What will you do now? Foster asked Jake during the transition briefing. Jake looked out the window at the gardens where the Queen waited for him. I am going to live, really live, for however much time I have left. The years that followed were quiet after the chaos of war. Jake and the Queen withdrew from the spotlight, though the Queen retained her title and authority. They traveled together, explored remote corners of the Viridian Empire, spent time on Earth so Jake could reconnect with his family. Lisa stopped writing critical articles and instead documented their unusual relationship in a book that became a bestseller on both worlds. Jake introduced the Queen to human art, music, and philosophy. She, in turn, showed him wonders that no other human had ever witnessed. They lived in the moment, making each day count, never forgetting that their time was limited. 30 years passed. Jake was 65, his hair completely gray, his body showing all the signs of human aging. The Queen looked exactly as she had the day they met, untouched by time. They sat together in the palace gardens, in the same spot where she had once told him he belonged with her. Jake's breathing had become labored lately, his heart struggling after a lifetime of stress and adventure. "I am dying," he said simply. There was no point in pretending otherwise. "I know," the Queen said, holding his hand. "Your doctors say you have weeks, perhaps days. I am sorry I could not give you longer." She smiled through her tears. "You gave me 37 years. Some mortals give me only 20. You have nothing to apologize for. Will you be okay after?" "No," she said honestly. "I will mourn you for centuries, just as I mourned the others. But I will also remember you, Jake Morrison. Every day we spent together, every word we spoke, every moment of joy and fear and love. I will remember it all, and I will be grateful." Jake died 3 days later peacefully, with the Queen holding his hand and whispering words of love in both human and Viridian languages. The funeral was attended by representatives from dozens of species. Jake Morrison was honored as a war hero, a diplomat, a bridge between worlds. But the Queen's private memorial in the Memorial Gardens was simpler. She commissioned a statue of Jake, as he had been at 35, young and vital, standing with his hand outstretched, as if inviting someone to join him. The inscription read, "He taught eternity, the meaning of a moment." 50 years after Jake's death, Ambassador Ryan Foster attended a reception at the palace. He was new to his position, young and eager to make his mark. The Queen greeted him with the same grace she showed everyone, but Foster noticed her gaze linger on him in a way that made him uncomfortable. "You remind me of someone," she said softly. "The way you speak, the passion in your eyes when you talk about building understanding between species." "I hope that is a compliment, Your Majesty," Foster said. The Queen smiled, sad and knowing. "It is. Come, walk with me. I want to show you the Memorial Gardens." As they walked, Foster felt the weight of history around him. He saw the monuments to mortals who had touched the Queen's life across millennia, each one a reminder that brief lives could leave eternal impacts. And when the Queen whispered, "You belong with me, my mortal," Foster understood that he was not the first to hear those words, and he would not be the last. Because some loves transcend time, even when time itself is the enemy. And some hearts, even those that beat for 8,000 years, continue to seek connection with those who burn bright and brief like stars in the darkness. Jake Morrison had taught the Queen that lesson, and in the Memorial Gardens, where his statue stood with hand outstretched, his legacy would endure for as long as the Viridian Empire itself. The doors opened, and warm air rushed in, carrying scents that reminded Jake of cinnamon and rain. A delegation of Viridians waited for them, tall figures in flowing robes that seemed to shift colors in the light. "Welcome, representatives of Earth," the lead Viridian said. His voice was melodious, almost musical. "I am Ambassador Khalif. Queen Lyrestra herself will receive you this evening. It is a great honor. She rarely attends first contact ceremonies anymore." Helen stepped forward, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "We are honored by her presence. I am Dr. Helen Carter, head of the Human Diplomatic Mission." Jake followed the group through corridors that seemed grown rather than built. Everything curved organically, walls flowing into floors and ceilings without harsh angles. Viridian citizens passed them in the halls, most barely glancing at the humans. They were beautiful in an otherworldly way, with skin that ranged from pale blue to deep violet and eyes that held too much knowledge. "They look at us like we are insects," Eric muttered to Jake. "To them we might as well be." Jake whispered back. They live for thousands of years, Eric. Our entire civilization is younger than some of their individual citizens. The reception hall was vast, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into what looked like actual clouds. Hundreds of Viridians filled the space, their conversations creating a sound like wind chimes. Helen led the human delegation toward the center, where a raised platform held a throne that seemed carved from a single massive sapphire. She sat there, and Jake forgot how to breathe. Queen Lyriastra was not like the other Viridians. While they were beautiful, she was something else entirely. Her skin was the color of moonlight on water, and her hair fell in silver waves past her shoulders. But it was her eyes that stopped Jake in his tracks. They were ancient beyond measure, holding depths that suggested she had watched stars being born and die. She rose from her throne as the human delegation approached, and the entire hall fell silent. "Humans," she said, and her voice carried through the vast space without effort. "Welcome to Azurth Prime. We are pleased to finally establish formal relations with your young species." Helen began the prepared speech, thanking the Queen for the opportunity, outlining humanity's hopes for cooperation and mutual understanding. Jake should have been listening, preparing for his own introduction, but he could not stop staring at the Queen. And then he realized something that made his heart skip. She was staring back at him, not at Helen, who was speaking. Not at Eric, who stood at attention in his impressive uniform. At Jake, the junior xenobiologist who was supposed to be barely noticeable in the background. Helen finished her speech and began introducing the delegation members. "And this is Jake Morrison, our xenobiological specialist." Jake stepped forward and bowed as they had practiced. "Your Majesty, I am honored to." The Queen descended from the platform in one fluid motion, crossing the distance between them before Jake could finish his sentence. She moved with grace that seemed to bend the laws of physics, and suddenly she was standing directly in front of him, close enough that he could see flecks of gold in her silver eyes. "You," she said softly, studying his face with an intensity that made him feel transparent. "What is your age, Jake Morrison?" "I... 32, Your Majesty." A smile touched her lips, sad and knowing, so young. "Tell me, what do you think of our world?" Jake was aware of everyone watching them, of Helen's surprised expression, of the murmur running through the Viridian courtiers. He was supposed to give a diplomatic answer, something measured and appropriate. "It is beautiful," he said honestly. "But it also makes me sad." The Queen tilted her head, her smile growing slightly. "Sad? Why would beauty cause sadness?" "Because humans will never build something like this," Jake said. "We do not live long enough to think in terms of millennia. We are like mayflies compared to you. We live and die before we can create anything truly lasting." The Queen was silent for a long moment, and Jake wondered if he had just destroyed humanity's diplomatic hopes with his honesty. Then she did something that shocked everyone in the hall. She laughed. It was not a polite, courtly laugh, but something genuine and warm, a sound that seemed to surprise even her. "I have met with 1,000 species over the centuries," she said, "and you are the first to speak of mayflies with such understanding. Come, walk with me. I wish to speak with you further." "Your Majesty," Helen interjected carefully, "perhaps after the formal reception." "The formal reception can proceed without me," the Queen said, not taking her eyes off Jake. "Ambassador Khalif will see to the details. I find myself more interested in conversation than ceremony today." She turned and began walking toward a side door, clearly expecting Jake to follow. He looked at Helen, who gave him a tiny nod, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. Jake hurried after the Queen, aware of hundreds of eyes tracking his movement. They walked through private corridors until they emerged in a garden that defied description. Plants from dozens of worlds grew in harmony, and a fountain at the center produced water that seemed to flow upward before falling back down in impossible spirals. "Do you know how old I am, Jake Morrison?" the Queen asked, stopping beside the fountain. "No, Your Majesty. I am 8,217 years old. I have ruled this empire for 6 millennia." The Queen noticed too, though she never mentioned it. He sometimes caught her staring at those gray hairs, with an expression he could not quite read. Then the message came from Earth that changed everything. Senator Patricia Brooks arrived at Ajraf Prime, leading a delegation that included Colonel Amy Rodriguez and Dr. Benjamin Lee, a psychologist specializing in cross-cultural adaptation. Jake met them in the formal reception hall, aware of how different he must seem to them. He wore Viridian-style robes now, had picked up subtle mannerisms from spending so much time with the Queen, spoke with a rhythm that reflected both human and alien patterns. Mr. Morrison, Senator Brooks said, her tone carefully neutral. We need to speak with you privately. They met in a secured room, and the senator did not waste time on pleasantries. The Earth government wants you to return home. Your tour of duty was supposed to last 2 years. It has been that long, and you show no signs of planning to leave. I have been providing valuable intelligence and maintaining the alliance, Jake said carefully. You have been living in the palace like a pet, Colonel Rodriguez cut in. You barely file reports. You ignore direct orders. You have clearly been compromised. I have not been compromised. I have been doing exactly what I was sent here to do, building relationships and understanding the Viridian culture. Dr. Lee leaned forward, his voice gentle. Jake, I have reviewed your psychological evaluations from before you came here and compared them to your recent communications. There are significant changes in your behavior patterns, your emotional responses, your priorities. These changes are consistent with someone who has become emotionally dependent on their environment, or consistent with someone who has grown and changed through new experiences, Jake countered. Senator Brooks pulled out a tablet.